It is sin that brings shame. Let me help develop that for you. First of all, let me just say this. Hang on. The mechanism that we use to respond to shame is control. Whenever we feel shame in our life, we try to control our situation. And it's an illusion. We control in order to feel safe. We control in order to avoid our fears. We control because all we have is to work with is our perspective. So we see a situation and we say, I'm going to do this with it. And we take control of it, because if that happens, this will happen. If that happens, that happens. We take control of it. But we're working from the context of our perspective. Our perspective has been shaped by sin. And our perspective has, as a result, been distorted by shame. So control is an illusion. And we never control a situation perfectly. Where the part of the illusion is we never actually control a situation. Things are always out of control. We just don't realise it. But we think we can. Our perspective is a shamed perspective. To love is to release from control. See what the dad did in the story? He released control. He didn't try to control the situation, because Jesus saying, this is my Father. When he says the Father, he says, this is my Father. This is what he's like. He released from control. We can always influence. That's not control. To speak into a person's life, even to speak into a person's life passionately. To say, I really, really think this is what you need to do, is okay. But when we try and make the other person do what we think is right, we've taken love out of the situation. So let's come to an understanding of what exactly shame is, so that we can get this connection between sin and shame, because I don't want you leaving here without an awareness of the connection between sin and shame. Shame is identity. Shame says, I am wrong. It doesn't just say I've done wrong things. The shame says, I'm no good. I'm worthless. I am wrong. I'm the problem. That's what shame says. When we hear those words in our head that says, I'm not good enough, that's shame. That's always shame. That is shame. That's what shame is. I'm not good enough. Shame is perception. I'm not good enough. So shame is identity. I am wrong. Shame is perception. I am not good enough. Shame is relational. In relationships, my worthlessness will be discovered. I need to withdraw. Shame pushes us away from relationships. So when we get into a conflict with a person, and we start to feel that need to get out of that conflict, to get away from that situation, we are withdrawing, because the pain of that is increasing our level of shame. And we break relationships because of shame. Now, there are some relationships that are so abusive, the only thing we can do is get out of them. But even then, those that have been in those situations know that you don't get out of that without feeling shame. Right? So I'm not saying stay in abusive relationships if there's a need to get out. But what I am saying is, every time we've been in a relationship that's broken down, it's been shame that's caused that break. All right? Shame is identity. Keep that in your mind. I am wrong. So here's some characteristics of shame. This is what shame feels like. Shame is a sense of exposure. People can see me. Know that? You feel that before? People can see what I'm really like. Why is public speaking so hard for so many people to do? And actually it's one of the biggest fears that a majority of people have is public speaking. Why? Because when I'm up speaking, people can see me. And what if I say something that's not right? Then I will look foolish. That's only one way we can be exposed, by the way, for those people that say, oh, I don't have a problem with that, you have a problem somewhere else.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly. A need to hide. Shame always brings a need to hide, right? I need to get away. I don't want people to know what I did. I need to get away. A perceived incongruence between expectations and achievements. That means there's a gap between what is expected of me and what I can achieve. That creates shame. That something's expected of me, I can't do it. In the gap is shame. Inappropriateness. I'm not the right person for this situation. Hey, will you go and paint that room? Oh, for give me a break. I could no more do that than I could fly. Sure, it's easy. You just go and paint the walls, get the brush and you paint, it happens for you. I don't know how to do it, it'll look horrible when I'm done. No, it's easy, just paint, brush. That's a conversation I've had in the past, as you can tell. If I was to paint that wall, it'd be on the ceiling, on the floor, it'd be nothing on the wall. I just don't do, but the person that knows how to paint, they can't understand that. It's easy, you put the brush, you go, it's done. I can't do that. So that's inappropriateness, right? So in somewhere area in your life, you know what that feels like.
Yeah.
Go and fix that computer. I have no clue how to fix a computer. No, it's easy. You just, right, Josh, you just put this here and that there and it all works. So you know what I'm talking about. A threat to trust. Shame is a threat to trust. I cannot trust. That person that I did trust hurt me. I cannot trust again. Those things are all shame. The contempt of self. I remember having a conversation with a guy one Sunday morning. He was on our music team and he was as mad as a cut snake. You people that aren't Australians, that just means really angry. He was mad as a cut snake. You get that. And what's going on? He said, and here's what he said. I am worthless. I just need to die. That he was about to play on the drums on the music team, and I said, "How about we give you a break this morning from playing the drums? Why don't you just go home?" I can't do that. I'm supposed to be in church. No, you don't have to be in church. You need time to think and reflect, and so I sent him home. Not because I was mad at him, but he needed some space, and so we gave him some space, and I went and visited him that week. And we had a chat, and he started a healing process that came to an incredible place. All right, let's. How did we get there? Why is it so deep? What's the connection with sin? Starts here. It's the garden. It's the story in the garden. Remember what happened in the garden? Adam and Eve wooed into taking the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and they choose to do it anyway. Let's have a think about that story a little bit. What was really lost? Well, prior to the fall, the first couple lived in a state of love that was free from shame. The Bible actually says that. That's the actual thing the Bible says, and somehow we missed it. It says they were naked and they felt no shame. Shame is an illustration in that shame on a culture of nakedness is an illustration in a shame on a culture of utter shame. If you're naked in this culture in public, you are utterly shamed. So when the Bible says they were naked and not shamed, it's saying they weren't dealing with shame. They were full of love. They didn't have shame in their life. It specifically spells it out. The temptation focused on the disparity between their existence and the existence of God. Has God said? God knows that if you eat of this fruit, you'll be like Him. There's a gap between where you are and where God is. So Satan is the one that introduces the thought of not being good enough. And he says, if you eat this fruit, you'll be like Him. Well, here's the problem. We are created beings. We're created to be in relationship with the eternal Father. But we are created. We are less. And so with that lessness comes a certain level of angst. I want to be more. And so as soon as Satan introduces shame into the environment, you're not quite good enough, something triggers. I am a creature. I am created. I want to be better. I should be better. Eat the fruit will make me better. I eat the fruit and what happens? Not better. I'm worse. Now I become shame. Before I was just thinking about it, now I become it. At the moment of sin, relationship was distorted. They hid themselves. The relationship with God becomes distorted. They hide themselves. They were shamed. This was the reality of their new identity. The relationship with the Father was distorted. The understanding of themselves was incomplete. I'm going to start pushing through here a little bit faster. Our identity is intended to be formed in relationship with God. It isn't. It's formed in relationship with God. So you and I are born outside of relationship with God. So we start from the place of disconnected from relationships. We come into this world disconnected in relationships. Shame is that loss of relationship. Me equals sin. So, I become me focused. I want to fix me. I'm the problem. I need to fix me. And all of my efforts to fix me is what sin is. Because I'm supposed to be in a relationship with God. And He's supposed to be the one that's taking care of me. But now I'm born outside of a relationship. It's distorted my perspectives of the entire world. And so now I am living out of the place of shame. Now here's something you guys are doing a great job hanging with me. I know there's a lot of stuff here. We can talk about it a lot. But here's something I need you to know. It's absolutely imperative. Because you feel shame doesn't mean you are sinning. The connection is not between sinning, doing things that are sin, and shame. There is a connection between doing things that are sin and shame. That's not the connection I'm making. There is one, but just so I can be a Christian and I can be forgiven for my sins, and I can be set free from sin and still experience shame. Why? Because sin, being born outside of a relationship with God, has distorted my brain. It's broken my brain. It's shifted the way I see the world. And so as a result of that, I can still and will still feel shame. So it's sin that's distorted my brain so that I experience shame. And that's going to be a very important point as we unfold it. So we will see shame in three ways. First of all, there's emotional shame. This is fairly self-evident, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. There's emotional shame. That's the embarrassment when you drop the bottle of milk. Oh, I'm embarrassed. That's emotional shame. You can identify that. There's psychological shame. That is the shame that says, that starts to get a hold of our psyche. It says, there's something wrong with me. I'm not worthy of relating to other people. And it gets worse and worse and worse. They call it becoming toxic shame. And it becomes very much a psychological problem. But it starts with what I call theological or ontological shame. It's the shame that comes as a result of not being born in relationship with God. And so that's that deep, deep part. Because we're born outside of relationship with God. And it's built into us. So the reason I can tell Patrick that, and as a sanctified, godly man, he can still get in touch with the shame, is because it's deep into us, it's deep in our being, and it's stained our brains to the very core of our being. And so we know it. Even after God sets us free from the beginning problem, which is what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, God does and can, it still has a stain on our minds that is deeper than what we realize until we see something like that. All right, let's see. Emotional shame, well, I've explained that a little bit. I'm not going to spend any time on that. I could. Psychological shame, it's identity, it's who I am. Spend a little bit of time on that. Theological shame, there we go, all that. All right, let's deal with a little bit between the differences between guilt and shame. Guilt says, I have done wrong. Shame says, I am wrong. Guilt requires, hang on, did you get, hang on, did that come on? Oh yes, it did. I should have looked over my shoulder. Guilt says, I've done wrong. Shame says, I am wrong. So here's something really interesting. That this is a thing that I've only discovered in the last 6 months. And I keep researching. I've only just learned this. So this is relatively new in my understanding. Guilt requires empathy. So I will feel guilty because I am in relationship with the one whom I've offended. In order to feel guilty, I have to actually have a relationship. Shame requires self-absorption. So shame is about how I feel about myself. Guilt is about how you feel after I've done wrong. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting?
That's true.
So when we talk about forgiveness of sins and being free from guilt, that's God's part of the picture. Guilt is a result of what I have done and in breaking relation, and I've hurt you. And so forgiveness deals with the broken relationship. So God brings guilt into our life. God speaks into our life and says and shows us where we are guilty because He loves us and He's drawing us to Himself. But shame says, I am worthless. I am the problem. I have to escape. I have to get away. God says, no, come to me. You're just guilty. I can forgive you. Shame says, no, I can't come. I'm worthless. I'm not good enough. I don't belong. Right? So it's a very, very different experience. Guilt is a consequence of love. Shame is a consequence of sin. Did you get that one? So some people will say, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I think this will come. In fact, I'm just going to explain. I won't even read it. Some people say, isn't a little bit of shame good? What if we had no shame? Wouldn't we just run amok? So shame has a little bit of good. In fact, it's the standard psychological position. Is a little bit of shame is a good thing. In fact, it's a lot. Even theologians that deal with shame will say we have to have a little bit of shame because a little bit of shame is a good thing. And I've struggled with that because I've developed this in the context of love. And so here's what I've come to conclusion. It hit me like a piece of 4x2 one day. Wait a minute. If you say that we need a little bit of shame to control us, to keep us relating to each other effectively, not step outside of the boundaries, it's shame that stops me from stealing from Patrick. It's, that's the way that shame works. It helps protect us. Wait a minute. Wouldn't love do that better? Wouldn't it be better not to steal from Patrick because I love him?
Yes.
Rather than because I feel bad about myself if I do? So there's nothing that shame can do that love can't do better. So we don't need shame. Well, if you don't have any shame, you'll be shameless. And then I came to understand what people are talking about is shamelessness. What I'm talking about is being shame-free. Shamelessness is that person that is pathological. They have no restraints. They are just going to do whatever they want to do to whoever they want to do it, and they could not care less. They run amok. They're the person who is the aberration in society. They're shameless. They can't be like that. That's true. But you know what the problem is there? They have built such a powerful wall against their shame, they no longer experience it. But to be shame-free is to be healed by love from our shame. So there's the difference. We're getting close to the end here, guys. In fact, I've got 2 more slides. Love moves us deeper to relationships, right? Always moves us deeper. Love frees and heals from shame. Shame moves us away from relationship. Love moves us to relationships. When God in Christ makes us holy, He is making us like Himself. God is love. God is making our story His story. He is healing us from our shame in our story. And the reason why I present this to you today in terms of our story, in terms of the telling of the story, shame weaves its web through all of our life. We have a tendency to put faith into moments because shame keeps faith outside of that. But here's the wonder-filled truth of what it is to be the holy people of God. It's to be set free from the power of shame at the core of our being. At the very core of our identity, I become Christ's. I am crucified with Christ. So it's no longer I that live, but Christ who lives in me. Well, what's this Christ like? He loves me and gave Himself for me, honors me with His life. I am in the place of honor. I struggle with any formulation of faith that puts us in the place of being worthless. In fact, I was listening to a comedian the other day, a Scottish comedian, and he made this comment. which hit me out because he was right off over here. All of a sudden he made this comment. He said, you know what? I'd go to church. I'd go to church. But I went to church when I was a kid. In fact, it was very clear that he'd been to his church his whole childhood because he knew everything. He said, but here's the thing. I go to church and we sing the songs. The songs all start out great. They all say things like, God is great. And then he says, but then it says, but we are, and he says a word that starts with SH and ends with T. It's got 4 letters. And so what he says is, when I'm in church, I understand God's great, but I feel like garbage. What's he talking about? Shame. So he's been to a church his entire childhood years, and he would love to be back there because he knows God is great. But he can't because he feels worthless. So when we talk about a church that's changing the world, we are talking about a church that understands what God can do in our lives and has allowed him to do it. Because the only thing that stops you and I from being people of glory is our shame. That's the only thing. We think, well, I don't know enough. I'm not good enough. Well, what's that? Shame. The only thing standing between you and me and the glory of God is our shame. The only thing. And I'll argue that front, back and upwards and downwards. The reason we have conflicts in church is shame. The reason we can't reach the people we want to reach is shame. Now, that's not all our problem. So that's their shame, and that's what we've got. But what we've got to do is start working out, how do we work out how to get around people's shame? How do we love them so much that they lower the barriers of their shame and let love in? That's the only question. It takes a long time. Love is not the easy way, but it is the only way.
Say yes.
It's not a quick, it's not a shortcut, but it is the only route. And so we get frustrated in the church because we don't grow fast enough. Or we learn, we're never going to grow, so we don't worry about it. We get frustrated about not growing. We never grow. Oh well, we can't grow, so let's just love ourselves and be happy and be done with it. What's that about? Shame, right? Because if I'm expected to grow, what's that? That's a difference between expectations and performance. It's achieved. So if the district superintendent comes and says, you guys have got to be growing. You need to be growing. Yes, let's grow. We can't grow. We're not doing it fast enough. Well, let's just love each other. Right? I mean, that's a short version of how that thing works. But that's how it works. That's how it works. That's shame. It's no quick fix to love people. You may not see the result in your lifetime. But all we have to do, what we have to do is say shame has no place in this equation. I'm going to love, and I'm going to love, and I'm going to love. Well, how far do we have to love? Well, here's the measure that God put on it. Stepped out of heaven, walked in this world, experienced shame to the uttermost, died on the shame-filled cross. Have you ever thought about how much shame is in the cross? It's outside of the city. The city is the place of honor. The hill is the place of shame. It's in the place of shame. The Bible says it actually says to be hung on the cross is to be shamed. To be hung on a tree is to be shamed. It points it out. So Jesus is hanging on the tree, filled with shame. His friends have abandoned him. That's shame. He's being mocked. That's shame. And then he cries these words. My God, why have you forsaken me? In that second, he's taken on the shame of the world. That's the only thing that can explain those words. What is to be forsaken? So forsaken is to be abandoned. What is it to be abandoned? To feel shame. My God, my God, why have you forsaken me? And here's the thing. We've made a theology about how God can abandon his son. But it's not. God didn't abandon him. God no more abandoned Jesus than he abandoned you and I. But what Jesus was dealing with was the shame of the world. You imagine carrying all the shame of all of history, of all of the world. What are you going to feel like? Abandoned? But the very next words are, it is finished. Into your hands, I commit myself. It's done. And then to prove it, they put him in the ground. But it cannot hold him. Love causes him to rise again. Amen. Love causes him to rise. Shame has no power. It's done. And we can spend our entire Christian life trying to get it right, trying to do it right, trying to respond to people's guilt, trying to fix people, trying to control situations, trying to control and living out of the application of shame. When Jesus has done it, the scriptures is about love responding to shame from the beginning to the end. And love wins. I read the last part. Love wins. Love wins. He conquers shame. Well, I told you it was going to go long. Sorry about that. But you guys just spent so much time talking. Just wonder if there's any questions or comments before we wrap up here. Any things that went on up in your brain said, I see that in my life. I see where that worked.
I think the part where you were saying about that it affects your psyche in some ways, even when you're sanctified, that's where renewal of the mind is so incredibly important to always be aware of, hey, what's actually going on here?
The mind, that's what the scriptures talk about very, very clearly. We're going to touch on that tomorrow. But that's exactly right, Patrick. It's the renewing of, it's all, the scriptures has covered it. And the reason that we miss it so much is because we keep moving away. We don't like shame. In fact, I remember reading a non-Christian psychologist or psychiatrist about shame. And he said, when I first started talking about shame, everybody would tell me, we can't talk about that. He says, but it's a psychological phenomenon. No, you can't talk about that. And then all of a sudden you realise, shame doesn't like to talk about itself. As soon as you start talking about shame, people feel shame. So don't talk about it. But then he made a career out of talking about it. All right, guys. You've been incredible. You've been amazing. You're stuck in there. No one went out. Well, the kids went out to play. That's perfect. Graham stayed in the whole time. That was fantastic. I know you want to get out there with those swings, Graham. I appreciate you hanging around.
We had a lost child. That's all we had.